The first howl of the winter storm struck Abigail's cheek like a slap as Judge Wilson slammed his front door, the words "harlot" and "disgrace" still echoing in her ears. February 1879 had brought the harshest winter anyone in Snake River, Wyoming had seen in decades, and now she faced it alone, 6 months pregnant with nowhere to shelter. "You'll not bring shame upon this household." The judge had roared moments earlier, his face purple with rage as he discovered his only daughter's condition. Her tearful explanations about the charming railroad man who'd promised marriage before disappearing meant nothing to a man whose reputation in the territory was everything. Abigail clutched her small bundle of possessions, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and the few dollars she'd managed to save from her position as the town's schoolteacher. A position now certainly lost. The wind sliced through her woolen coat as if it were made of paper, snow already accumulating on her shoulders as darkness descended. She stumbled forward, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other holding her meager possessions. Main Street was deserted, shutters battened down against the impending blizzard. The few lights still burning in windows offered no welcome for a woman in her condition. Mrs. Thorpe at the boarding house had already made it clear when Abigail's condition became noticeable that she ran a respectable establishment. The church would offer no sanctuary. Either Reverend Mills had delivered a sermon just last Sunday about the wages of sin that had set the town's gossips alight. The wind howled again, bringing a fresh assault of snow that nearly blinded her. Abigail's legs trembled as she pushed forward. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and she had no destination in mind. The railroad station was closed until morning, and even then, where would she go? With what money? Desperation drove her toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered homesteads. Perhaps there, away from judgmental eyes, someone might show mercy to a woman and her unborn child. Her feet, already numb, slipped on the icy path, sending her tumbling to her knees. A sob escaped her lips as she struggled to rise, her skirts now soaked with snow. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. The daughter of the territory's most respected judge, who had once turned away unwed mothers herself in compliance with her father's wishes, now found herself in the same desperate straits. She managed another 100 yards before her strength began to fail. The storm had intensified, the howling wind drowning out her prayers as she staggered forward. Through the curtain of white, she spotted a faint glow, a lantern in a window perhaps half a mile distant. It might as well have been across the ocean. Still, it represented her only hope. Abigail focused on that light, forcing one foot in front of the other, ignoring the alarming numbness spreading through her limbs. She was sweating beneath her clothes despite the cold, a bad sign, she knew. The distance seemed to stretch impossibly as she fought through deepening snow. When her knees buckled again, she found herself unable to rise. The small bundle of possessions slipped from her frozen fingers as she crawled forward, undignified but determined. "Please," she whispered, though no one could hear. "Not for me, but for my baby." The light wavered, seeming to retreat rather than draw closer. Abigail's consciousness began to fade, the cold seeping into her very bones. As darkness crept at the edges of her vision, she thought she heard the crunch of snow beneath boots, but dismissed it as wishful thinking. Then strong arms were lifting her, and a deep voice cut through the howling wind. "Madam, can you hear me?" The voice was rough but urgent. "Stay with me now." Through half-frozen lashes, Abigail glimpsed a bearded face, brows furrowed with concern beneath a snow-dusted hat. Then blackness claimed her. Levi Ormond had been checking his fence line when he spotted something dark against the snow. At first, he'd thought it was a fallen tree branch, but some instinct made him investigate despite the worsening blizzard. Finding a woman, and a pregnant one at that, half frozen in the snow, was the last thing he'd expected. He gathered her slight form into his arms, alarmed at how little she seemed to weigh despite her condition. Her face was deathly pale, lips tinged blue, but he could feel her shallow breathing against his neck. "Hold on," he muttered as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward his cabin. "Just hold on." Levi had built his home 3 miles from Snake River proper, preferring solitude after returning from the war. The modest cabin was warm at least, the fire he'd built before heading out still burning strong in the stone hearth. Once inside, he laid the woman gently on his bed, working quickly to remove her snow-soaked coat and shoes. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch, her pulse faint but present. He piled every blanket he owned atop her before stoking the fire to blazing. "Madam." He tried again, patting her cheek lightly. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. With a grimace, Levi recognized the signs of severe cold exposure. He'd seen it during the war, men freezing in winter camps. Some had survived, many hadn't. The pregnant woman before him needed more than blankets. Shedding his own wet coat, Levi prepared hot water, soaking cloths that he carefully wrapped around her frozen feet and hands. He heated broth from his evening meal, lifting her head to try coaxing a few spoonfuls between her blue-tinged lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but he persisted, all the while talking to her in low, steady tones. "You're safe now, madam. Fire's warm. Storm can't get you here." Night had fully descended, the blizzard raging outside his windows. The woman stirred occasionally but didn't wake. When her shivering intensified, a good sign, he knew Levi continued his ministrations with grim determination. It was near midnight when her eyes finally opened, confusion and fear evident in their hazel depths. "Easy," Levi said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "You're safe. Found you in the snow." "My baby," she whispered, hands moving protectively to her swollen belly. "Seems all right," Levi answered, though he had no way of knowing. "You're both warming up good now." She struggled to sit, panic flaring in her eyes as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings and the bearded stranger before her. "Who?" "Levi Ormond, madam. This is my place, about 3 miles out from Snake River. I don't mean you any harm, I swear it." He held his hands up, palms out. "Just couldn't leave you to freeze." The woman seemed to assess him, her gaze taking in the simple cabin with its sparse furnishings before returning to his face. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, as some of the tension left her shoulders. "Abigail," she offered weakly. "Abigail Wilson." Recognition flickered across Levi's features. "Judge Wilson's daughter," she flinched, then nodded, a single tear tracking down her pale cheek. "Not anymore, I expect." Levi didn't press the matter. A young, pregnant woman alone in a blizzard told its own story. The judge's reputation for harsh justice was well known throughout the territory, extending apparently even to his own flesh and blood. "Can you take some broth now?" he asked instead. "Need to get you warm from the inside, too." Abigail accepted the cup with trembling hands. After a few sips, color began returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if no need for that," Levi cut in, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. In a town as rigid with propriety as Snake River, many doors would remain firmly closed to a woman in her situation. "Rest now," he suggested, moving to make a pallet for himself near the fire. "Storm's likely to keep us snowbound for a couple days at least. Plenty of time to figure things out when you're stronger." Abigail nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. As she settled back against the pillows, Levi turned away to give her privacy, missing the way her hand moved to her belly, the silent promise she made to her unborn child that somehow they would survive. Morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, it had intensified overnight, snow piling against the cabin's windows and door. Levi had risen before dawn, as was his habit, to stoke the fire and begin his day's work limited now to indoor tasks. He was mixing biscuit dough when Abigail stirred, her eyes opening to find him at the small wooden table. "Morning," he offered, keeping his voice neutral. "Storm's still blowing. Might be a few days before the pass is clear." Abigail struggled to sit up, embarrassment coloring her features as she realized she was wearing only her thin cotton chemise beneath the blankets, her dress having been too wet to leave on her. Noticing her discomfort, Levi turned his back. "Got some clothes might work for you." "Old shirt of mine, pair of trousers with suspenders. Not proper, but they're dry." "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the bundle he held out without turning. "Could I trouble you for some privacy?" Levi nodded, heading outside to check on his livestock despite the storm. The barn was only 30 yards from the cabin, but the journey through thigh-deep snow left him gasping. Inside, his 2 horses and milk cow greeted him with soft nickering. At least they were warm and well-fed. By the time he returned, stomping snow from his boots, Abigail was dressed in his clothes. The shirt hung past her hips, the trousers cinched tight above her swollen belly with suspenders crossing over her shoulders. She'd rolled the cuffs several times to free her feet. Despite the strange attire, she maintained a quiet dignity that impressed him. "Feeling better?" he asked, hanging his coat by the door. "Yes, thank you." She stood somewhat unsteadily, one hand braced on the table. "I don't mean to impose. Once the storm clears, don't worry about that now." Levi gestured to the chair. "Sit, eat something. Got biscuits nearly ready and some salt pork I can fry up." Abigail lowered herself carefully into the chair. "You're very kind, Mr. Ormond." "Levi," he corrected, turning back to his cooking to hide his discomfort with her formality. "Just Levi." They ate breakfast in relative silence, the howling wind outside filling the gaps in conversation. Levi wasn't much for talking anyway, having grown accustomed to solitude in the 3 years since purchasing this plot of land. "You a rancher?" Abigail finally asked, breaking the silence. "Small scale," he replied. "Got 60 head of cattle, 2 horses, a milk cow, enough to get by." "No family?" The question, innocent as it was, hit a tender spot. "No, not anymore." He didn't elaborate and she didn't press. After breakfast, Abigail insisted on washing the dishes despite his objections. As she worked, she suddenly gasped, one hand flying to her belly. Levi was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" "The baby. Just kicking," she reassured him with a small smile. "Strong today." After a moment's hesitation, she asked, "Would you like to feel?" Most people find it fascinating. The invitation surprised him. Levi had never touched a pregnant woman's belly before, but found himself nodding. Gently, Abigail took his calloused hand and placed it against the firm roundness beneath his borrowed shirt. At first, he felt nothing. Then a definite thump against his palm made him jerk back in surprise, before a slow smile spread across his bearded face. "Strong indeed," he said, genuinely impressed. "How much longer before?" "About 3 months, I think." Her expression clouded. "I had been counting on my teaching position to save enough for the baby's arrival, but—" She trailed off, the reality of her situation clearly overwhelming. Levi cleared his throat. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until you figure things out. Storm might last a week anyway, the way it's blowing." Gratitude shone in her eyes. "I can work, cook, clean. I won't be idle." "No need for that," he shrugged. "But company's not unwelcome, I suppose." The admission surprised them both. Levi had grown comfortable with his solitary existence, but something about Abigail's quiet presence didn't feel like an intrusion. The blizzard continued for 4 days, confining them to the small cabin. During that time, they established a careful routine. Levi took the pallet by the fire despite Abigail's protests, insisting she keep the bed. During the days, he taught her to play checkers with a set he'd carved himself, and she read aloud from his small collection of books, mostly practical guides to ranching, with a few dog-eared novels mixed in. On the third evening, as they sat before the fire, Abigail finally shared her story. The handsome railroad engineer who'd courted her with pretty words and promises of a future in San Francisco. Her naive belief in his intentions. His disappearance when she'd revealed her condition. Her father's rage upon discovering she was with child. "He gave me an hour to pack," she said, staring into the flames. "Said he'd rather have a dead daughter than a fallen one." Her hands trembled slightly. Mother just watched, never said a word. Levi's jaw tightened with anger at the judge, a man he'd never much respected to begin with, but whose cruelty now seemed boundless. "Some men don't deserve the name of father," he said quietly. Abigail looked up. "What about your family? You said you had none, but—" Levi rarely spoke of his past, but something about Abigail's open vulnerability made him willing to share his own story. "Had parents in Missouri. Good folk. Died of fever while I was fighting for the Union. Brother died at Gettysburg." He paused. "Was married briefly. Sarah. She passed in childbirth 2 years back. Baby too." "Oh, Levi." Abigail's hand reached across to cover his. "I'm so sorry," he nodded, uncomfortable with sympathy. "Came west after, needed open spaces." Understanding passed between them, two souls who had experienced profound loss, now thrown together by circumstance and a winter storm. On the 5th day, the sun finally emerged, glittering blindingly off the snow-covered landscape. The temperature remained bitterly cold, but the storm had passed, leaving behind drifts taller than a man in some places. "I should return to town," Abigail said as they stood in the doorway, surveying the transformed world. "See about the stage, perhaps." "I have cousins in Denver who might take me in." Levi frowned. "Snow's still deep. Road won't be passable for days yet. Nevertheless, I've imposed long enough." Her voice held resolve tinged with regret. "You've been more than kind, but I must make arrangements." "You could stay," Levi blurted, surprising himself. "Until the baby comes, at least. Safer here than traveling in your condition." Abigail looked at him with undisguised wonder. "Why would you offer such a thing? You barely know me." Levi struggled to articulate what he himself didn't fully understand. "Got space. Got supplies. Town's not kind to women alone." He hesitated. "And maybe I've grown used to the company." That evening, after long discussion, they reached an agreement. Abigail would remain until the baby's birth, helping with household tasks as she was able. Afterward, she would reassess her situation. "I insist on paying rent," she said firmly. "I still have my savings, not much, but enough to contribute." "No need," Levi began, but her expression stopped him. "My pride is one of the few things I have left," she said quietly. "Please allow me this." He nodded, respecting her determination to maintain some independence despite her circumstances. Over the next week, they settled into a comfortable routine. When the road to town finally cleared enough for travel, Levi hitched his horses to the sleigh and made the journey alone, returning with supplies and Abigail's trunk, which Judge Wilson had apparently ordered left on the porch of their home like so much unwanted baggage. Among her possessions was a half-finished baby blanket, which Abigail worked on in the evenings by firelight. Levi found himself fascinated by the delicate movements of her fingers as she created something beautiful from simple yarn. "My mother taught me," she explained, noticing his interest. Before I disappointed her. A shadow crossed her face. She was making booties to match, but I suppose those are burned now. That night, Levi lay awake on his pallet, troubled by thoughts of a woman so coldly cast out by her own parents, of a child who would enter the world unwelcomed by its grandparents. He remembered his own mother's warmth, how she'd embraced his wife Sarah as a daughter, how excited she would have been about a grandchild. By mid-March, the worst of winter had passed, though nights remained cold. Abigail's presence had transformed the cabin in subtle ways, curtains fashioned from spare fabric at the windows, wildflowers in a jar on the table once the first blooms pushed through the melting snow, and the scent of fresh bread nearly every day. Levi found himself hurrying through his outside chores, oddly eager to return to the cabin's warmth and Abigail's company. Their conversations flowed more easily now, her quick mind and education complementing his practical knowledge. She expressed interest in his ranching operations, and he found himself explaining breeding practices and grazing rotations with a detail that would have bored most city-bred women. "You'd have made a fine teacher," she told him one evening as he demonstrated how to mend a bridle. He laughed, the sound still unfamiliar to his own ears. "Cattle don't complain about boring lessons. Neither would students with a teacher who cares about his subject," she countered, her eyes warm. These moments of connection became more frequent as March gave way to April. Levi noticed how sunlight caught the auburn highlights in Abigail's dark hair, how her laugh brightened the entire cabin. For her part, Abigail found comfort in Levi's steady presence, his quiet strength and undemanding support. The baby grew more active, often kicking visibly through the fabric of her dresses, proper ones now, as she'd altered her clothing to accommodate her expanding waistline. Levi became accustomed to Abigail pausing mid-sentence, one hand flying to her belly with a surprised "oh," before smiling and continuing. One warm afternoon, as Abigail hung laundry on the line while Levi repaired a fence nearby, he heard her sudden intake of breath. Looking up, he saw her clutching her side, face contorted with pain. He was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" "Just a sharp pain," she said, her breath returning to normal. "It's past now. The baby, I don't think so. Too early still." But her expression held uncertainty that troubled him. That evening, as Abigail prepared for bed, she gasped again, this time dropping to her knees beside the bed. "Abigail?" Levi was beside her, supporting her weight as she breathed through another spasm of pain. "Something's wrong," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "It's too soon." A wet stain spread across the front of her nightgown, and Levi's heart sank. He'd seen enough birthing animals to recognize the signs. "I'm getting the doctor," he said firmly, already reaching for his coat. "It's 8 miles to town," she protested weakly. "In the dark, I'll make it." His tone brooked no argument as he eased her onto the bed. "Just hold on, both of you." The ride to Snake River was the fastest Levi had ever made, his horse pushed to its limits as he galloped through the moonlit night. By the time he pounded on Dr. Catherine Barnes's door, his mount was lathered with sweat, sides heaving. Catherine answered in her dressing gown, gray hair hastily pinned up. One look at Levi's face told her everything. "Let me get my bag," she said, already turning. "Childbirth?" "Yes, madam, Judge Wilson's daughter. She's early 7th month or so." Catherine's eyebrows rose at the mention of Abigail, but she asked no questions as she efficiently gathered her supplies. Within 10 minutes, they were in Levi's wagon, Catherine having insisted her buggy would be too slow on the rutted spring roads. "How long has she been having pains?" The doctor asked as they jolted along. "Started this afternoon, just one. Then again tonight, worse. Waters broke just before I left." Catherine's expression grew grave. "And she's definitely not full term. Says she has about 2 months yet." The doctor nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "I've delivered babies earlier that survived. Much depends on the mother's strength and God's grace." They reached the cabin just before midnight. Abigail was still conscious but clearly in distress, her face pale with sweat beading her forehead. Catherine took charge immediately, sending Levi outside to heat water and find clean linens. When he returned, the doctor was examining Abigail, her expression giving nothing away. "Baby's coming," she confirmed. "Not ideal timing, but we'll manage." She looked at Levi. "Are you the father?" "No, madam," he answered, feeling heat rise to his face. "Just helping out." "Well, just helping out might need to continue. I need another pair of hands, and she'll need your strength to hold on to." "That acceptable to both of you?" Abigail nodded weakly, reaching out. Without hesitation, Levi took her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip as another contraction seized her. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Abigail fought bravely, her determination to bring her child safely into the world evident in every labored breath. Levi remained at her side, offering his strength, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragements that surprised even him with their tenderness. Dawn was breaking when Catherine finally announced, "I can see the head. One more big push, Abigail." With a cry that tore at Levi's heart, Abigail bore down, her entire body tensing with the effort. Then came another cry, thin, wavering but unmistakably the sound of a newborn taking its first breath. "A boy," Catherine announced, quickly wrapping the tiny infant in a clean cloth. "Small, but he's got good lungs." Tears streamed down Abigail's exhausted face as the doctor placed the squirming bundle on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You're early, but oh, how I've waited for you." The baby was indeed small, his skin wrinkled and reddish, but his cries were surprisingly strong for his size. Levi stared in wonder at the tiny being, suddenly aware that he was witnessing a miracle. "He needs warmth," Catherine instructed, efficiently cleaning up. "Keep him against your skin as much as possible. He'll need to nurse frequently every hour if he'll take it." The doctor stayed through the morning, showing Abigail how to nurse the hungry infant and checking both mother and child for complications. By noon, satisfied that the immediate danger had passed, she prepared to leave. "I'll return tomorrow," she promised, packing her bag. "In the meantime, rest, both of you," she glanced at Levi. "That means you too, Mr. Ormond. You look dead on your feet." After Catherine departed, silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the occasional snuffle from the sleeping infant cradled in Abigail's arms. Levi moved about quietly, stoking the fire and preparing a simple meal, acutely aware of the new life now sharing their space. "Would you like to hold him?" Abigail asked softly, noticing Levi's frequent glances toward the bed. He hesitated. "Been a long while since I held anything so small." "It's not difficult," she encouraged. "Just support his head." With uncharacteristic nervousness, Levi approached, carefully accepting the tiny bundle. The baby weighed almost nothing in his large hands, his entire head fitting easily in Levi's palm. Dark lashes fanned against pink cheeks as the infant slept, tiny fingers curled into fists. Something shifted in Levi's chest as he gazed down at the child, a protective fierceness he hadn't felt since the war, when he'd stood watch over wounded comrades. "He'll need a name," he said, reluctantly returning the baby to Abigail's arms. She nodded, stroking one finger along the infant's cheek. "I've been thinking about that. I'd like to name him Thomas after my grandfather. He was the only one who showed me real kindness growing up." She hesitated. "And perhaps Levi for his middle name, if you wouldn't mind." Startled, Levi looked up to find Abigail watching him, her expression open and earnest. You'd name him after me." His voice came out rougher than intended. "You saved both our lives," she said simply. "Without you, neither of us would be here now." Unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat, Levi merely nodded, turning away to hide the moisture gathering in his eyes. The first weeks with baby Thomas were exhausting for all. The infant's early arrival meant he needed constant attention, feeding frequently and struggling sometimes to maintain his temperature. Abigail devoted herself entirely to his care, often going without sleep for days at a stretch. Levi found himself taking on more household duties, cooking simple meals and insisting Abigail rest whenever Thomas slept. He became adept at building a fire with one hand while holding the baby with the other when Abigail needed a moment's peace to bathe or eat. Catherine Barnes visited every few days, pleased with Thomas's progress despite his early arrival. "He's a fighter," she declared on her third visit, taking after his mother in that regard. On one such visit, as Abigail rested, Catherine cornered Levi outside the cabin. "You should know there's talk in town," she said without preamble, "about Judge Wilson's daughter living out here with you." Levi stiffened. "Don't much care for gossip." "Nor do I," Catherine agreed, "but Abigail might. The judge has been telling anyone who'll listen that she ran off with some railroad worker, finding out she's actually here with you." She left the implication hanging. "She needs peace," Levi said firmly, "not more judgment." Catherine studied him thoughtfully. "You care for her." It wasn't a question, but Levi answered anyway. "She's a good woman. Her and the boy deserve better than what they've been handed." The doctor nodded. "Indeed they do." She hesitated. "Just be careful, Levi. Hearts in these situations can get entangled in complicated ways." After she left, Levi pondered her warning. He couldn't deny that his feelings for Abigail had grown beyond mere charity or friendship. Her courage, her gentleness, her fierce love for her son all had worked their way beneath his carefully constructed defenses. But he had no right to burden her with his feelings, not when she was still recovering, still finding her way as a new mother. Spring blossomed fully as April turned to May. Thomas grew stronger daily, his cheeks filling out, his cries becoming more insistent. Abigail recovered her strength, resuming more household duties despite Levi's protests that she should continue resting. "I've never been one for idleness," she told him one morning as she kneaded bread dough, Thomas sleeping in a basket nearby. "Besides, I want to earn my keep." "You do," Levi assured her, pausing on his way out to check cattle. "More than you know." Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary before Levi tipped his hat and headed out, confused by the warmth spreading through his chest. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas cradled against Abigail's shoulder. She broke their comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said quietly. "Thomas is nearly a month old now, strong enough to travel soon." Levi felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You still planning on Denver? It seems the sensible choice. My cousins there might help me find employment." Her voice held no enthusiasm. A fresh start away from judgment. "You could stay," Levi said before he could reconsider. "Both of you." Abigail turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Here, as your tenant indefinitely?" "No." He took a deep breath, gathering courage. "As my wife, if you'd consider it." Her lips parted in shock. "Levi." "It's not just charity," he hurried to explain. "These past months having you here, it's like the cabin became a home again. You're smart, strong. Good with figures. I've seen your account book. We could build something here for Thomas, for us." "You can't mean that," she whispered. "A respectable man like you taking on another man's child, a woman who—" "I don't care about respectability," he interrupted, suddenly fierce. "Never did much. Care about you, though, and Thomas." He hesitated. Understand if you don't feel the same. Just wanted you to know there's a choice beyond leaving. Abigail was silent so long that Levi began to regret his impulsive proposal. Then she reached out, her free hand covering his where it rested on the porch rail. I need time to think, she said softly. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Levi nodded, relief and hope warring in his chest. Take all the time you need. The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Levi was repairing a saddle when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, he saw a well-dressed man on an expensive horse making his way toward the cabin. Judge Wilson. Levi set aside his work, moving to intercept the visitor before he reached the cabin where Abigail was nursing Thomas. Judge, he said, nodding curtly. Wasn't expecting you. Wilson dismounted, his expression thunderous. Where is my daughter, Ormond? I know she's here, doctor. Barnes let it slip when my wife questioned her. She's resting, Levi replied, standing his ground. Had a difficult birth. Something flashed across the judge's face, concern, perhaps, quickly masked by righteous anger. I've come to bring her home. This situation is entirely inappropriate. With all due respect, sir, she's a grown woman who makes her own decisions. Levi kept his voice level despite the anger building in his chest, including whether she wants to see you. How dare you, Wilson sputtered. I'm her father. I have every right. You gave up that right when you threw her out in a blizzard, Levi cut in, his control slipping. She nearly died. Your grandchild, too. The judge's face paled slightly. I didn't know a storm was coming, he muttered, the first hint of defensiveness cracking his authoritarian facade. Wouldn't have mattered, Levi replied. No decent man turns out his own blood, pregnant or not. Before the judge could respond, the cabin door opened. Abigail stood in the doorway, Thomas bundled in her arms. Her face was pale but composed as she regarded her father. Hello, father, she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. Wilson stared at his daughter and grandson, conflicting emotions warring on his face. Abigail, he finally managed, your mother's been worried. Has she? Abigail's tone held a hint of bitterness. She showed no concern when you cast me out. The judge had the grace to look uncomfortable. We were shocked, disappointed. But that doesn't mean I nearly died in that storm, Abigail interrupted, stepping forward. If not for Levi finding me, both Thomas and I would have frozen to death. Does mother know that? Wilson's gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms. Thomas, you named him after my father. Yes. Abigail's chin lifted. He was a kind man who believed in second chances, values I hope to instill in my son despite his grandfather's example. The judge flinched as if struck. Abigail, please, come home. We can sort this out privately as a family. I have a home, she replied firmly. With someone who accepted me and my child without judgment or conditions. Wilson's gaze shifted to Levi, who stood silently beside Abigail, his presence protective but not possessive. And what exactly is your relationship with my daughter, Ormond? He demanded. Before Levi could respond, Abigail spoke. Levi has asked me to marry him, father. I haven't given my answer yet, but I'm strongly considering it. The judge's eyes widened with shock. Marriage to a common rancher. Abigail, your prospects, my prospects, she laughed without humor. As the fallen daughter of Judge Wilson, an unwed mother, what prospects did you imagine I had after you disowned me? Wilson seemed at a loss for words, his carefully constructed worldview crumbling before the reality of his daughter's situation. At least come visit your mother, he finally said, his tone less commanding. She misses you, even if her pride won't let her admit it. Abigail's expression softened slightly. I will consider it once Thomas is older and stronger, but I make no promises beyond that. Recognizing defeat, the judge nodded stiffly. With a final look at his grandson's face, partially visible in the blanket wrapping, he remounted his horse. "You know where to find us," he said, then turned and rode away. Levi and Abigail stood in silence, watching until he disappeared from sight. Then Abigail's composure broke, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Thomas closer. "Hey now," Levi said gently, guiding her back inside. "You were magnificent, stood up to him better than most men I know would have." "I meant what I said," she told him, wiping her tears. "About considering your proposal, I've been thinking of little else since last night." Levi's heart quickened. And I think. She took a deep breath. "I think I would like to accept if the offer still stands." Joy surged through him, tempered by concern. "You sure?" "Don't want you agreeing out of gratitude or fear of being alone." "It's neither of those things," Abigail assured him, meeting his gaze directly. "These months with you have shown me what a good man truly is. Patient, kind, honest." She smiled softly. "The fact that you would even worry about my reasons tells me all I need to know about your character." "Not much of a catch," Levi warned, hardly daring to believe her acceptance. "Just a simple rancher with modest means." "You're everything that matters," she countered. "And I think I've fallen in love with you, Levi Ormond, gradually, quietly, but completely." The admission, spoken so simply, broke something loose in Levi's chest. He stepped forward, one hand gently cradling her cheek. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. At her nod, he leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with months of unspoken feeling. Thomas squirmed between them, breaking the moment with a small cry that made them both laugh. "He approves," Abigail said, smiling as she soothed the baby. "Good," Levi replied, "because I plan on being the best father that boy could ask for." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Mills, who had undergone a change of heart after Catherine Barnes publicly challenged his Christian charity regarding Abigail's situation. The doctor stood as witness, along with Levi's nearest neighbor, a gruff older man named Harlan, who had taken a shine to Thomas during his infrequent visits. To everyone's surprise, Abigail Wilson appeared just before the ceremony, arriving alone in the family buggy. "Mother," Abigail breathed, shocked at the sight of the elegant woman hesitating in the doorway of the small church. "I couldn't miss my only daughter's wedding," Abigail said softly, "no matter what your father says." She approached cautiously, her gaze dropping to Thomas, sleeping peacefully in Catherine's arms. "May I?" With Abigail's nod, Catherine transferred the baby to his grandmother's arms. Alina's composure cracked as she gazed down at the infant's face. "He looks like you did," she whispered. "Same chin, same long eyelashes." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Abigail, I should have stood up to your father, should have come looking for you." "You're here now," Abigail replied, her own eyes moist. "That's what matters." The ceremony proceeded with Abigail holding Thomas, her presence a balm to wounds Abigail had thought would never heal. When Levi and Abigail exchanged their vows, the love shining in both their eyes left no doubt in anyone's mind that this union, unusual as its beginning might have been, was founded on the strongest of foundations. Abigail stayed only briefly after the ceremony, pressing a small package into Abigail's hands before departing. "Your grandmother's pearls," she explained. "I always intended them for you. And there's a letter, just a few words your father doesn't know about, an account in the bank in your name. Not much, but enough to help with the baby." "Thank you," Abigail whispered, embracing her mother. "Will you visit again?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away from my grandson," Abigail promised. "Your father will come around eventually. His pride is strong, but his love for you runs deeper, even if he's forgotten that for now." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Abigail and Levi worked side by side to expand the ranch operations, her education and quick mind complementing his practical experience. Thomas thrived under their care, growing from a fragile newborn into a sturdy infant whose laugh filled the cabin with joy. By his first birthday, Thomas was taking his first tentative steps, lurching across the porch to collapse into Levi's waiting arms. "That's my boy," Levi would crow, swinging the giggling child high. Strong as a mountain lion. Judge Wilson never formally apologized, but he began to thaw after Thomas's birth, eventually visiting the ranch on holidays and special occasions. His relationship with Levi remained strained, but a grudging respect developed between the two men, united in their love for Abigail and Thomas. In the spring following Thomas's second birthday, Abigail discovered she was expecting again. The news filled their home with renewed excitement and joy. "Think you can handle another one?" she teased Levi one evening as they sat on the expanded porch of their home, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard. "Reckon so," he replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Long as it's half as good as the first." 7 months later, Sarah Eleanor Ormond entered the world, a healthy 8-pound girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. Unlike her brother's dramatic arrival, Sarah was born with relative ease, Catherine Barnes arriving in plenty of time to oversee the delivery. "Perfect," Levi whispered when the midwife placed his daughter in his arms. "Just perfect." As Sarah grew alongside her brother, the Ormond ranch prospered. Levi expanded his herd, building a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from as far as Cheyenne. Abigail, drawing on her education, began teaching not only their children but others from neighboring homesteads, eventually establishing a small school in what had once been their storage barn. Judge Wilson, watching his grandchildren play during a Christmas visit 5 years after that fateful blizzard, finally offered the closest thing to an apology his proud nature would allow. "You've built something fine here," he told Abigail as they stood watching Levi teach Thomas to whittle. "Something I didn't believe possible when, well," he cleared his throat, "I was wrong about Ormond, wrong about a lot of things." "Yes, you were," Abigail agreed, but without bitterness. "Though I sometimes think that if you hadn't cast me out that night, I might never have found my way here. Never have known what real love looks like in a marriage, in a family." The judge nodded, accepting both the forgiveness and the gentle rebuke in her words. 10 years from the night Levi found Abigail shivering in the snow, their home had grown to include 4 children: Thomas, Sarah, and twin boys, James and William. The modest cabin had been expanded into a proper ranch house, with a separate schoolroom where Abigail taught not only her own children but a dozen others from surrounding properties. On the anniversary of that night each year, Levi and Abigail would stand on their porch after the children were asleep, remembering the storm that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Levi asked on the 10th such anniversary. "Staying here instead of seeking your fortune elsewhere?" Abigail looked out over the prosperous ranch, then up at the man beside her, still strong, though with silver now threading through his beard, lines of laughter crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "This life, this family we've built, it's more than I ever dared hope for," she smiled, leaning into his embrace. "That night when I thought I'd lost everything, I actually found everything that mattered." "Guess we both did," Levi agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Who'd have thought a blizzard would turn out to be the greatest blessing of my life?" As they stood together in the moonlight, the warm glow of their home behind them and the vast Wyoming sky above, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperate beginnings, a pregnant woman cast out, A lonely man haunted by loss, they had forged something beautiful and enduring. The storm that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her everything she now cherished: love, family, purpose, and the quiet certainty that sometimes, when life seems at its darkest, salvation waits just beyond the next snowdrift, in the form of unexpected kindness and a chance at new beginnings.